Tonight, Israel's war cabinet views an evacuation plan before its promised Rafah offensive. Ukraine reveals the number of war dead and repeats calls for more arms. Former Brazilian President Bolsonaro denies coup allegations at a giant rally in Sao Paulo. And students make fresh calls for university debts to be wiped as part of a sweeping review. I'm Ricardo Goncalves. This is SBS World News. Good evening. Israel's war cabinet has confirmed that the IDF has now presented its plan to evacuate civilians from Gaza's southern city of Rafah, clearing the way for a full-scale offensive. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the campaign will go ahead regardless of any new ceasefire deal with Hamas, repeating that total victory is just weeks away. But the US says it still can't support Israel's campaign.
1.5 million people crammed into Rafah, waiting for the war to reach them. Israel has been threatening to advance on the city it describes as the last bastion of Hamas for weeks. It's now pushing ahead. A statement from the Israeli Prime Minister's office saying the army presented the war cabinet with a plan for evacuating the population from the areas of fighting in the Gaza Strip with the upcoming operational plan. No details were given about what that plan entails, and Israel's closest ally says it hasn't been briefed.
We've been clear that we do not believe that an operation, a major military operation, should proceed in Rafah unless there is a clear and executable plan to protect those civilians, to get them to safety, and to feed, clothe, and house them. And we have not seen a plan like that.
He also confirmed Israel and Hamas have now agreed to, quote, the basic contours of a new hostage exchange and ceasefire deal. But Israel says its offensive in Rafah will go ahead regardless.
If we have a deal, it'll be delayed somewhat, but it'll happen. If we don't have a deal, we'll do it anyway. It has to be done because total victory is our goal, and total victory is within reach, not months away, weeks away once we begin the operation.
Negotiations will now move to Doha and Cairo next, while the rest of the region ups the pressure. The Palestinian president meeting Jordan's King Abdullah in Amman. A statement from Jordan's Royal Hashemite Court saying the king warned of the continuation of the war on Gaza during the fasting month of Ramadan, which will lead to a spillover of the conflict. The biggest risk for that remains Lebanon. Another 2 Hezbollah fighters were killed in Israeli strikes overnight. And Israel's defence chief says any deal in Gaza will not apply to Lebanon.
אם יש כאן מישהו שחושב שכאשר נגיע לעסקה של שחרור חטופים בדרום והאש תפסיק, הדבר הזה יקל ממה שקורה כאן, הוא טועה.
Aid deliveries to the Strip's north have slowed to a trickle. In the ruins of Gaza City, a crowd of hundreds waiting for a single truck. UNRWA today said its last successful delivery of food to Gaza's north was more than a month ago. Claudia Farhat, SBS World News.
The Ukrainian president says 31,000 soldiers have been killed in the war, in the first official figures since Russia's invasion 2 years ago. But US intelligence suggests the real number is more than double that. Volodymyr Zelensky continues to plead for military aid, warning millions will die without it.
Still smouldering, this train station, one of dozens of buildings damaged by Russian bombardment. The railway operator said the station had historic significance as an important evacuation point at the beginning of World War I. Now another casualty of this war. For the first time in more than a year, the Ukrainian president has provided concrete figures of troop deaths.
Українців 31 тисяча. І для нас це дуже боляче. Я не скажу, скільки поранених, тому що Росія буде знати, скільки людей пішло з поля бою. Просто не скажу про це.
In December, a declassified US intelligence report estimated 315,000 Russian troops had been killed or injured in Ukraine, a similar figure to that estimated by the UK Ministry of Defence, but significantly higher than figures provided by Russia. The Ukrainian president anticipates a Russian offensive at the end of the northern spring or in summer. He says the plan for a Ukrainian counter-offensive is clear, but refused to give details. What is common knowledge is the need for additional weapons. Ukraine's defence minister says 50% of military aid promised to Ukraine isn't delivered on time, making it difficult to compete with Russia.
They use up to 15% official and unofficial budget to the war, which constitutes over 150 billion US dollars. So annually, it's officially. So basically, whatever committed that doesn't come on time will lose people, will lose territories.
A US government shutdown is looming, Congress under pressure to pass a spending bill before the Friday deadline, and funding for Ukraine remains a major debate point, with some House Republicans opposing a bill promising more than $90 billion in military aid. President Zelensky with this message to lawmakers who think it won't make a difference.
To understand it is to come to the front line to see what's going on, to speak with the people, then to go to civilians to understand what will be with them, and then what will be with them without this support, and he will understand that millions of people have been killed, will be killed.
Russia, meanwhile, saying it's made further gains near Avdiivka and Donetsk after President Vladimir Putin vowed last week to push further into Ukraine. Tanya Dandrinos, SBS World News.
Belarus leader Alexander Lukashenko has announced he will run for president again next year. The country is currently voting in parliamentary and local elections, which have been described by the US and opposition leaders as a sham, with calls to boycott them.
He's been in power for more than 30 years. Alexander Lukashenko is confident he'll be re-elected for a seventh term.
Tell the opposition that I will go to elections. Not a single person, a responsible president, will abandon his people who followed him into battle.
Here he's casting his ballot in parliamentary and local elections, which have been described by the US as a sham. Exiled opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has called on people to boycott the elections, denouncing them as fake.
This so-called electoral campaign hasn't met any democratic standards. All political parties not loyal to the regime and independent media have been silenced.
Most candidates belong to 4 officially registered parties, all who support Lukashenko's policies.
The regime's attempts to use these fake elections to legitimize its power will not be successful. The people of Belarus see through this sham, this facade of democracy.
The last election, held in 2020, was plagued by allegations of vote rigging and resulted in months-long protests and the arrest of thousands of people. The Belarus Democratic Forces, a coalition of parties that oppose Lukashenko's presidency, say many of them are still detained.
Take into account that about 1,500 political prisoners, including all political leaders who were in Belarus at that moment, are now in prison.
A close ally of Russia, he relied on Vladimir Putin's support to help quash the protests in 2020. But these elections will help to maintain his tight grip on power with no legitimate opposition.
We will elect absolutely reliable, intelligent people who understand the tasks facing our people. Therefore, none of the opposition's options, even the most radical ones, will work in Belarus.
For the first time, observers from the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe were not invited to monitor the polls. Gloria Kleisch, SBS World News.
The Australian government will impose a raft of new Magnitsky-style sanctions following the death of a Russian dissident, Alexei Navalny. 7 officials at the prison where he died last week will be hit with financial restrictions and travel bans. Australia says the Russian government bears responsibility for Navalny's death and has called for an independent investigation. At least 15 people have been killed in an attack on a Catholic church in Burkina Faso. It took place during Sunday Mass in the northeast of the country in Ouadalon province, close to the border with Mali. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack in Essakan village. Burkina Faso has one of the largest Christian populations in the Sahel region, making up around a quarter of the population. But the country has been gripped by insurgent violence, with major Islamist groups spilling over from neighbouring countries, including Mali. They're thought to control around half of Burkina Faso's territory. 30 years after more than 500,000 people were killed in Rwanda's genocide, some members of the community living here say they fear for their lives. In a special SBS investigation, they describe how they're targeted in Australia. That will be a little later in the bulletin. Supporters of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro have staged a massive rally in São Paulo for the far-right leader, who is being investigated over whether he incited a failed coup. He claims to have been a victim of political persecution since leaving office just over a year ago.
In Brazil's largest city on a Sunday afternoon, a seemingly endless gathering. The atmosphere heady. To the uninitiated, they might appear football fans celebrating. In fact, it was Jair Bolsonaro who was arriving. The former president looking every inch a current political player, though he is barred from office until 2030. Facing investigation over accusations that he tried to overturn the 2022 election results and pressure military chiefs to join a coup attempt. Before the throng, his denial.
O que é golpe? Golpe é tanque na rua, é arma, é conspiração. É trazer classes políticas para o seu lado, empresariais. É isso que é golpe. Nada disso foi feito no Brasil.
Dozens of lawmakers and some state governors in attendance, the crowd evidently delighted.
Bolsonaro, para mim, eu apenas identifico com quase todas as ideias que ele defende, que é Deus, pátria, família, liberdade de imprensa, liberdade de expressão, livre mercado.
But Bolsonaro's supporters have shown another side. January 8, 2023, invading Brazil's presidential palace, Supreme Court and Congress. Calling for a military coup a week after Bolsonaro's leftist successor took office. Bolsonaro today called for an amnesty for those convicted for attacks on public buildings. At the protest, Bolsonaro kissed his wife, who has her own political aspirations. Israel's flag prominent in response to Brazil's current president, Lula, who says Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. Bolsonaro's supporters longing for his return.
País que foi tomado por partido comunista. Estamos vivendo dias terríveis nesse lugar, onde nós somos calados, não temos direito a falar sobre a verdade que acontece.
The rally demonstrating Bolsonaro's enduring political presence, nor is he going anywhere, since his passport has been confiscated. Pruluan, SBS World News.
Thousands of Filipino protesters have gathered across the country on the 38th anniversary of the uprising which ended the brutal dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Now they're demonstrating against President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who is trying to amend the constitution to extend his term beyond the current 6-year limit.
A distant memory for many of these protesters. But they say the spirit of the People Power Revolution in 1986 lives in them. 38 years on, they're fighting an attempt to change the constitution by the son of the president that earlier generation toppled.
We remember the lessons from history. A Marcos dictator once tinkered with the constitution, and another Marcos is trying to monopolize power again by trying a charter change campaign.
Marcos and his allies in Congress insist the change will only involve economic provisions of the Constitution. The protesters don't believe it.
The promise that is limited to economics is not true, because once they open for a constituent assembly, constituent convention, you cannot limit it to only economic provisions. All provisions are open.
Including the presidency, at the moment limited to a single 6-year term.
The current constitution of the Philippines was drafted and approved after the 1986 mass uprising that ended the 20-year rule of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., father of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Protesters here say efforts to overhaul the constitution are part of historical revisionism that made the Marcos political comeback possible.
Marcos Jr. isn't the first Philippine president to attempt to change the constitution. Every president since 1992 did so, including his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte. But Duterte now says he's against change and has called for the secession of the island of Mindanao in the southern Philippines, a move critics say is self-serving.
I think it began when Marcos junked him from the coalition. You know, that by itself was a clear signal that things were finished between them. And it seems to me that further signs have come out since.
Including persistent reports that investigators of the International Criminal Court have been to the Philippines to look into Duterte's drug war, despite Marcos Jr.'s repeated assertion that his government won't help the ICC.
It's Barnaby Lowe reporting from Manila. Coming up, New South Wales Police turn to a new area in the search for the bodies of a missing Sydney couple. And why insurance prices are set to rise. That's in tonight's On the Money. New South Wales Police have moved the search for the bodies of missing couple Jessie Baird and Luke Davies to an area south of Sydney. A crime scene has been established at a property in Bungonia, an area near Goulburn. Police officer Bo Lamar Condon has been charged with 2 counts of murder over the men's deaths.
In a remote location 200 kilometres from where they lived, police begin a new search for the bodies of Jessie Baird and Luke Davies.
It is our number one priority at this moment to try and locate Jessie and Luke to give the family some solace.
Bo Lamar Condon, a serving police officer, has been charged with their murders. He was a former partner of Mr Baird who worked as a television reporter.
He was more than just a colleague, he was our friend. He was like a little brother. Speaking of Luke Davies, he described him as the one to some of his closest friends. He was in love, and my heart just aches.
Police allege Bo Lamar Condon used a police-issued firearm to kill the couple in their Sydney home last Monday. Today, authorities revealed an angle grinder and weights were then purchased from a hardware store before the accused hired a white van and drove to this property. Bo Lamar Condon turned himself in but has refused to give details on the location of the bodies. Police say they were led here by information from an acquaintance.
We also believe that it's possible the accused has returned to that property and retrieved the bodies and disposed of them somewhere else.
Victoria Police will now carry out an independent review of the New South Wales Police firearms storage procedures.
It's a failure if someone has used their service firearm in the manner that's alleged.
The alleged murders occurred at the start of Sydney's Mardi Gras season, a 2-week LGBTQIA+ celebration. Although police always take part, there are now calls for that to change.
And that would be a real travesty for this organisation to be excluded.
Today, more tributes for the pair. Luke Davies' colleagues from his work as a flight attendant laid flowers, remembering the couple described as beautiful souls. Danielle Robertson, SBS World News.
And if you or someone you know needs support, you can seek 24-hour help through 1-800-RESPECT. That's 1-800-737-732. There are fresh calls for university debts to be wiped following the release of the highly anticipated Universities Accord final report. 47 recommendations were made in the biggest review of tertiary education in a generation, but some student unions have expressed concerns about the details.
funding for disadvantaged students, debt cuts and paid internships. Just a few of the recommendations made in the university's accord in an effort to make education fairer and accessible for all, including First Nation students.
Any measures that encourage Indigenous students to take up higher education opportunities, I think, is a really positive step forward, particularly for First Nation students who are located in rural and regional areas.
The report has been welcomed by the National Union of Students, but they say it's not nearly enough. The union urging the government to remove HECS debts and make tertiary education free.
Students shouldn't have to put themselves in this position just to get a degree. The people who are introducing this legislation are mostly people who benefited from free education, and they didn't have to enter their career in the workforce with a massive ballooning debt over their heads.
A call echoed by the Greens.
We need to do that if we're going to reach the aspiration, which the government is saying they have, of 80% of all people being able to attend tertiary education. And to get more disadvantaged people into tertiary education, it's going to take more than words.
The review also backing calls for students to be compensated for compulsory internships. But the union says this doesn't necessarily recommend placements be paid. Instead, it pushes for financial support, like one-off grants.
Students deserve to be paid for the work they undertake while on placement, while on an internship, while doing work integrated learning. We deserve to be paid at a minimum wage rate. In any other circumstance, not paying people for the work they're doing would be illegal.
Concerns have also been raised about the limited comments on international students in the review, despite their huge contributions to universities' revenue.
Our international students are heavily cross-subsidising our research output, our new buildings, and indeed our domestic student tuition fees. A lot more could be done to ensure that they're given job placement, safe, affordable accommodation, and also comprehensive student service delivery.
While the report proposes some major changes, the student union says much of the detail, which is critical to its success, is not included. Mahno Zanguri, SBS World News.
The NT's longest-running inquest into the shooting death of an Aboriginal teenager in Central Australia has entered its final week. Zachary Rolfe, the former police officer who fatally shot Kumanjai Walker, took to the stand in Alice Springs today. His long-awaited appearance follows lengthy delays caused by a string of legal appeals mounted by Mr Rolfe's legal team, and a warning to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers about images in this following story.
It's taken more than a year to get former Constable Zachary Rolfe to give evidence in the inquest into the death of 19-year-old Kumanjai Walker. Returning to Alice Springs, the former police officer entered the court without saying a word. But once in the witness box, Zachary Rolfe described a grim picture of the police force he once served. When asked about racist language, Mr Rolfe told the coroner, "I would say it's unacceptable, but accepted in the NT Police. I haven't seen a lot of racist behaviour, but racist language was normalised in the NT Police Force." Mr Rolfe described how in the Alice Springs Police Station muster room, I could hear something racist said nearly every day, before claiming the Territory Response Group, the most elite force in the service, had until recently an annual award named after a racist slur. The award was for exhibiting the most like behaviour of the year, and the staff would make the recipient dress up in a toga and give him a wooden club with nails at the end of it. He said members of the TRG who were part of those awards are now senior management in police. This was accepted and this was known about by multiple people who have given evidence here and multiple people who have lied about. And the people who have taken part in it have moved their way up the executive, and as you said, culture starts at the head. The former NT cop shot and killed Warlpiri teenager Kumanjai Walker during an attempted arrest in the community of Yuendamu, 300 kilometres northwest of Alice Springs. In his separate criminal trial, Mr Rolfe was found not guilty of murder, manslaughter and engaging in a violent act causing death. The council assisting the coroner has requested Mr Rolfe provide a list of senior NT police members who have used racist language. It came after Mr Rolfe's own integrity came into question, as it was revealed he lied about illicit drug use and prior charges for assault and public nuisance on multiple police force applications before becoming a member of the NT Police. The inquest continues tomorrow.
That was Emma Kellaway reporting. The federal government will face its first electoral test of the year on Saturday. With its revamped Stage 3 tax cuts centre stage, 2 new opinion polls show support for Labor's primary vote has slipped.
Parliamentary Sparkies on strike.
What do we want? Fair pay.
While Nationals MP Barnaby Joyce takes the week off after this video emerged earlier this month, the result, he says, of mixing medication with alcohol.
And I hope he went to church yesterday and all he had was altar wine.
As the coalition is forced to swallow Labor's changes to Stage 3 tax cuts.
The coalition's support for a tax cut should never be read as an endorsement of Labor's breach of faith.
While there appears to be broad public support for the changes, Saturday's Dunkley by-election is the first real test. The latest Resolve poll puts the coalition's primary vote ahead of Labor's for the first time since the election, though Anthony Albanese remained preferred Prime Minister. In the latest news poll, Labor's primary vote fell to 33%, still ahead on a two-party preferred basis. Anthony Albanese leading Peter Dutton by 12 points as preferred PM.
We'll see what happens in Dunkley on the weekend. We know that it's a difficult race.
Peter Dutton is hoping to trim Labor's margin in Dunkley as the coalition eyes a one-term return to power, linking cost of living pressures with what it perceives to be Labor's weak points: border protection and immigration.
Does the Minister agree that Labor's policy of granting 500,000 visas in just 1 year has contributed to the average weekly cost to rent a unit in Frankston rising from $350 when Labor came to government to $420 today?
They left a mess and we're busy cleaning it up, whether it is in migration or whether it is in housing.
But Labor's latest housing reforms aimed at first home buyers are stalling.
The Greens want movement on capping rent increases, building public housing and scrapping the massive tax handouts for property investors.
Another housing showdown looming in the Senate. Sarah Tomevska, SBS World News.
Some members of the Rwandan community here have told SBS they fear for their lives. In this second story in our special series of reports on foreign interference, they describe how they're targeted by a network of agents recruited by the Rwandan government on Australian soil. This year is the 30th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide, and with an election in Rwanda in July, some members of the Rwandan community say these events have led to an uptick of intimidation and stamping out of government criticism.
Noel Ziabamwe is desperately searching for his brothers who have disappeared in Rwanda. He believes they were abducted by the Rwandan government to punish him for refusing to become an agent for President Paul Kagame's spy network here in Australia.
They tried many times to corrupt me, to make me be who they wanted me to be, but I refused. And by refusing, I was seen as an enemy of the country.
Despite living in Australia, Noel is also concerned about his own security. He told SBS he's received a constant barrage of threats and intimidation from the Rwandan regime, and claims in 2017 the then Rwandan High Commissioner to Australia made a public declaration at a community event in Sydney, suggesting that if he had a gun, he would shoot him.
I had to sometimes watch both sides, especially when I stop.
What are you most concerned about?
My safety and my life. In Rwanda, there's unexplained accidents.
Sources say the Rwandan diaspora is encouraged to join the Rwandan community abroad, a group linked to Kagame's regime. They are required to take an oath of allegiance to the governing party, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, a ticket to being viewed favourably by the regime and its surveillance network.
It's a very complex network which has people who would have come here as refugees
We have people who came through other various regimes. People may have come here as students. People may have come here to work. It manifests through an atmosphere of cohesion.
You have to know where you go. You have to know who's sitting next to you. You have to know their position. The community is not united the way it should be. July last year, we had a cultural event here, and we received some messages really threatening community and asking them not to take food because they think it was poisoned.
Stoking fear in Australia, sources say the regime also creates smear campaigns against those who don't support the Rwandan government and divides the expat community via a government-issued diaspora card.
Get to know exactly who is abroad and also get to know who is with them on who is not.
In a statement to SBS, the Rwandan High Commission in Singapore, which is accredited to Australia, described these allegations as nonsense, saying the Rwandan community abroad contributes over $450 million to the Rwandan economy in remittances. And despite distortions and disinformation on Rwanda's efforts by detractors, national unity is a priority for the country.
3 decades of human rights abuses in Rwanda and impunity for them, and then their increasing sort of position on the international stage, I think has emboldened them. They're now suppressing dissent outside their borders. If they continue to be able to get away with that, it's just going to continue.
Robert Mukombozi is a former journalist and member of the exiled Rwandan National Congress opposition party. He says he is actively hunted by the Rwandan government, both here and abroad.
What's at stake when it comes to political opponents of the Rwandan government?
In April 2022, when I visited Uganda to see family, only to be surrounded by soldiers who took me to a military facility saying they have credible information that I'm going to be assassinated, I had no option but to return to Australia. So that's the kind of life that we live.
He says the Australian government isn't doing enough to crack down on Rwandan operatives.
I'm not just surveilled and my gadgets hacked in Australia and profiled. The risk of physical violence or physical harm on individuals in this country is very possible. The community is crying out loud for us to push back.
In a statement to SBS, a spokesperson for the Department of Home Affairs says it regularly engages with culturally and linguistically diverse communities who are concerned about the threats of foreign interference to build community awareness and resilience. But for Noel Ziabamwe, he's taken matters into his own hands. In a quest to protect others and for answers about his missing brothers, he's enlisted the help of high-profile barrister Jennifer Robinson, filing a complaint to the United Nations Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances.
It's important that people are brave enough to stand up and say this is not okay and to raise their case at the UN. And of course, it's the UN's role because the Rwandan government is not properly investigating these cases. More often than not, they're complicit in them and are trying to cover up the truth.
The Rwandan government denies involvement.
This year, it's going to be 5 years without knowing where my 2 brothers may be. I think that they have died. They have died.
A heavy cost for standing up to a foreign government. Jennifer Shearer, SBS World News.
And tomorrow night we speak with members of the Cambodian community who say they are being closely monitored by foreign agents here. They fear that activity will increase when the Australian government welcomes the Cambodian Prime Minister to next week's ASEAN gathering in Melbourne. Suncorp has warned insurance premiums will remain high as the industry faces a more challenging business environment. Rochelle Harrison-Plesh joins me now with more. Rochelle, the company has still posted a $500 million profit.
Ricardo, Suncorp Group has blamed significant reinsurance costs, natural disasters and ongoing inflationary pressures for those higher consumer prices. The company posted a half-year profit of $582 million, supported by a 16.3% rise in insurance premiums. That result falls largely in line with the December quarter CPI reading, highlighting the strongest annual rise in insurance premiums since 2001. The company acknowledged that customer affordability remains under pressure, but says it will continue to push premium growth in the low to mid-teens for the remainder of the year as it battles costs.
Our pricing will be reflective of what we're seeing in terms of input costs largely, and we will keep a very close eye on them.
Meanwhile, the group's banking arm, which is expected to be sold to ANZ, posted a 25% drop in half-year profitability. Suncorp says the intended $4.9 billion sale will allow a singular focus on its insurance business. It expects completion of the merger by mid-year, subject to more approvals. The results led Suncorp shares higher. Health insurer NIB also realised profit growth, but still traded lower as it warned of a sluggish recovery across its international student and travel businesses, and will be standing by for a government decision on the future of premium prices later this week. Also reporting today, Dan Murphy's and BWS owner Endeavour Group. It says it has benefited from the high cost of living as value offerings kept patrons coming through the door. The company posted strong sales of $6.7 billion for the half.
As with our leading retail brands, our hotels enjoy strong customer engagement given their positioning as family-friendly, affordable hospitality venues, ideally suited for customers in a higher cost of living environment. The best examples of this in the recent quarter were our strong performance through the festive season and record patronage on Christmas Day.
Trading, however, has since slowed to be almost flat in January. The company's stock price wore the brunt of that decline today, falling 3.5% by the close. Overall, the market gained, albeit marginally, as reporting season rolled on. TPG fell after reporting a profit hit. The banks did well, alongside materials group Alumina, as it backed an all-share takeover from US partner Alcoa. The retailer's also receiving a boost as Kogan.com returned to profitability, posting its first dividend payout in 3 years.
If we look over the course of this reporting season, one thing that we can say again is that the retail sector has been performing a little bit better than expected, or at least not showing the kind of slowdown in consumer spending that many had feared, over the last half or so. So you go back to look at JB Hi-Fi, Levisa's results in the last couple of weeks too. Households continue to spend, retail spending seems to be at least not as bad as previously expected. So again, Kogan's results today tell that story.
In currencies, $1 Australian dollar is buying 65.5 US cents and is higher against the New Zealand dollar ahead of Wednesday's Reserve Bank decision on interest rates there. Gold was trading around $2,032 US, while oil dropped to its lowest price in 3 weeks, placing renewed pressure on the miners, which remain on shaky ground as demand for Australian nickel spirals. It follows an Indonesian supply glut of so-called dirty nickel sourced from coal. That's prompted a pullback on Australian investment in the resource, placing thousands of jobs on the line. Speaking at the National Press Club, mining boss Andrew Forrest acknowledged the supply dynamic, but stressed the superior quality of green Australian exports.
Indonesia are destroying rainforests, are destroying marine environments, are running only on dirty coal. How's your green energy argument going, Elon? And propagating the fossil fuel sector.
We're standing by to hear more about the job's impact as the future of Western Australian nickel mines remains in the air. And Chinese car maker BYD, which overtook Tesla in global sales of electric vehicles last quarter, has released its first supercar. The fully electric Yangwang U9 can hit 100 kilometres per hour in just 2 seconds and reach a speed of 309 kilometres per hour. It's the most expensive set of wheels sold by BYD, rivalling Ferrari and Lamborghini, and will set Australian car enthusiasts back roughly $300 $262,000, but that's before import costs, Ricardo, as the model is only currently available in China.
I don't need to go that fast. Thanks, Rochelle. Coming up, the growing disagreement between the Mexican president and the media. And in sport, why Liverpool's League Cup win is just so special to Jurgen Klopp. Political tensions are rising in Mexican politics, with the president revealing the phone number of a journalist after he objected to the question she asked. Now his son's phone number has been posted online. Fellow reporters have condemned what they say is a presidential attack on their profession.
The Mexican government's used state media to launch an online attack spot against the New York Times bureau chief, whose questions the president objected to.
Your phone is from the New York Times, and whoever sent you to do this report.
In his televised morning press conference, the president also read the bureau chief's cell phone number aloud from a letter she'd sent his team asking for comment for an upcoming article. That in particular has sent alarm bells ringing here. Just to put this into context, Mexico's one of the most lethal countries for journalists in the world, where they receive attacks not just from criminals, but from authorities themselves. Free speech groups say it sets a dangerous precedent.
The vast majority of death threats in Mexico are sent to reporters via WhatsApp, via Facebook Messenger and other such applications. And as such, local officials in Mexico could use the president's actions as a justification for their own actions and basically no longer have any prior restraint to continue this.
The president's revealing of the journalist's number was actually illegal if she wasn't asked for her permission first, the head of the country's Access to Information Institute told us.
We all have to abide by the law. If the law establishes that I cannot disclose a telephone number or personal data that was collected in the exercise of my powers, then why am I disclosing it? You would have to justify why this disclosure was made.
The president was later asked if he was responsible should anything happen to her in a country where more than a dozen journalists were killed in 2022.
No, don't exaggerate. If she's worried, she should change her number.
So what was the New York Times article about? The day after the president's tirade, it was published. It reports that US officials spent years looking into allegations that allies of President López Obrador took money from drug cartels. La investigación de autoridades estadounidenses. But there's no smoking gun, and the president himself was never accused of taking any cash. The article also states the US never began a formal investigation. But now, instead of talking about the pros and cons of the piece, the news is of another journalist at risk, this time after the actions of the head of state.
That's John Holman with that report. Sport now, and if the League Cup final proves to be Jurgen Klopp's final match at the iconic Wembley Stadium, what a way to go. Liverpool beat Chelsea 1-0 in extra time despite fielding a team full of youngsters. Klopp is leaving at the end of the season and called this trophy the most special of his career.
At Wembley, this red versus blue was nothing new, and once again there was almost nothing between the teams. Liverpool stars, Núñez, Salah, etc. injured and watching. Liverpool's League Cup goalkeeper is Kelleher.
Oh, what a save!
Right there to repel Chelsea's best early attack. 59 minutes gone, and here comes Virgil van Dijk's header.
Van Dijk!
Goal, simple. It never is anymore. Watch Liverpool's Endo offside and blocking a Chelsea player, the referee eventually decided. VAR ruled it out. Now this final was Chelsea's opportunity to build their new identity. Conor Gallagher was central to their best moments, but a goal, no, that did not come. Liverpool had teenage substitutes on the pitch. Extra time was almost done when Van Dijk headed again. And this time, no VAR, just the joy.
What we see here today is so exceptional. We might never see again, and not because I'm on the sideline, because these things don't happen in football. In my more than 20 years, easily the most special trophy I ever won.
The first trophy of Liverpool's season, it may not be the last. But whatever comes, they have this moment, this success, to help say goodbye.
Liverpool's kids are all right. Jurgen Klopp has another trophy.
Real Madrid has increased its lead at the top of the La Liga, but needed a late goal to do it. For a long time, it looked like Los Blancos were out of luck against Sevilla. A Lucas Vazquez goal was ruled out by the VAR system, and Sevilla's keeper was in great form. But he couldn't stop second-half substitute Luka Modric from scoring a superb winner 10 minutes from the end. The Matildas are back on Australian soil for the second leg of their Olympic qualifier. They have virtually sealed a spot at the Paris Games after a 3-0 victory in Uzbekistan at the weekend. And this morning, the team flew into Melbourne for Wednesday's second leg. The game has been a sellout since December.
Since the World Cup, we love coming here. We love playing in Australia. The fans are incredible. We just love to make this country proud, and hopefully we can put another good performance and qualify for the Olympics. And what better to do that at your home in front of our fans.
The weather will be very different for the Matildas. In Uzbekistan, they faced freezing conditions and snow, but in Melbourne on Wednesday, the temperatures will get into the high 30s. The Boomers have made it 2 wins out of 2 in the FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers. They beat Indonesia 106-51 in Jakarta overnight. Isaac Humphries was Australia's standout player with 18 points. The defending champions are top of Group A with 4 games to go. The top 2 in each group qualify for the next year's Asia Cup in Saudi Arabia. A mishap with a kicking tee has cost Italy a historic rugby win over France. The French were leading at half-time but had a man sent off. Up against only 14 players, Italy levelled the scores before winning a penalty kick at the end of the game. It should have been straightforward for Paolo Gabisi, but the ball fell off its tee. And with the shot clock ticking down, he rushed his attempt and it hit the post. Agony for Italy, who have never won a Six Nations match in France. Coming up, the weather and the trailblazing performer recognised by the Screen Actors Guild. To the weather forecast, large areas of cloud lie over the tropical regions of the Northern Territory and Queensland, and also extending south along the eastern Queensland coast and out to the northern part of New South Wales. There's also a low to mid-level band of cloud from southwestern WA across to South Australia and southern New South Wales. Major centres: clouds over Sydney and Canberra, sunny in Melbourne, partly cloudy in Hobart, a hot day expected in Adelaide, clouds for Perth, showers and a possible storm in Darwin, partly cloudy for Brisbane. Further afield, thunder in Nandi, cloudy in Noumea, a few showers for Auckland and Christchurch. In Southeast Asia, thunder in Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, rain in Jakarta, drizzle over Denpasar, fine for Phnom Penh. Further north, clouds about most of the region, including Beijing, Seoul, Tokyo and Taipei, a high of 32 degrees in Manila. West, sunny weather in Baghdad, rain for Islamabad, partly cloudy in New Delhi. Europe, Stockholm, a few showers, partly cloudy for London, fine for Kiev, Paris and Madrid. Rome will see some thunder and clouds over Istanbul and Athens. In Africa, rain in Algiers, partly cloudy over Cairo, fine in Casablanca, thunder in Lagos and Johannesburg. In South America, fine in Caracas and Panama City, wet in Bogota, La Paz and Rio. Sunny though in Santiago. And for North America, showers in Vancouver, sunny in San Francisco, clouds over LA, snow in Denver, rain in Washington, fine in Miami and Mexico. If the Screen Actors Guild Awards are any prediction for success at next month's Oscars, then Oppenheimer looks set for glory. The historical epic swept up prizes across several categories last night, but the awards will also be remembered as the first time an Indigenous actor has collected an individual award.
Lily Gladstone, The Killers of the Flower Moon.
Already the first Indigenous actor to win a Golden Globe back in January, Lily Gladstone again entered the history books at the SAG Awards.
That's how you are.
I don't know what she said, but it must have been Indian for handsome devil.
The actor of Blackfeet and Nimipu background winning among a competitive field of female actors.
My friends, fellow actors, I feel the good in what you have done, what you do.
We have so many deaths, we've lost count.
Why did you come here?
Playing an Osage woman in the true story of a community that suffered a string of murders in the 1920s, Gladstone spoke of the importance of storytelling in an increasingly divided world.
It's so easy to distance ourselves. It's so easy to close off, to stop feeling, and we all bravely keep feeling. And that humanizes people. That brings people out of the shadows. It brings visibility.
We're in a race against the Nazis, and I know what it means if the Nazis have a bomb.
Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer continued its dominance, picking up the Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor,
Oppenheimer,
and Best Movie Cast awards, proving it'll be the film to beat at next month's Academy Awards.
Thank you so much.
Taisok Husey, SBS World News.
And that is The World this Monday. You can catch up on our bulletins on SBS On Demand, and for the top stories, head to the SBS News website. Liz Maddock will be back with our next bulletin, which is coming up at 10:15. From now, from the news team, I'm Ricardo Goncalves. Good night.